These are not people that get along together easily and completely. And the notion that they're all sticking together here is something that tells you that this is a very strong position, and it's the Democrats who have to worry about being on the other side.
So look ahead now, if we make another assumption that the president will win later this evening, how powerful will that vote be in sweeping away the other problems that have cluttered up the Clinton White House, the haircut, the travel office, and all the lack of focus and the inability to communicate?
Not terribly powerful in that respect, no. A loss would have been crushing, as I said. But the smart people around the president, and believe me, there still are some smart ones, they understand that these other problems will not be swept away by a victory here, that they need to be addressed on their own. And that's why there are rumblings, and I think you're going to see a shakeup of the White House staff fairly soon. It's been in the works for some time, been talked about, and now the conversations about it have been sped up because of these recent events. But those other issues have to do with the president's and his staff's judgment, experience, and instincts, and all of those need improving.
But won't we see tomorrow, Kevin, great big bold headlines, Clinton victory, that'll be the lead on all the broadcasts? Won't that wipe away some of the impression of incompetence?
Well, the reason he's in trouble is that the average American has decided they don't like what's happening in the economy, they don't like his management of the economy, and they don't like his emphasis on taxes. The fact that this program appears to be going another degree towards success, which is more taxes on the people, I don't think is going to be cheering. I think the interesting question is whether that's going to sour economic expectations even more.
And a final question. If he had trouble getting his act together for these House votes today, what's he going to face in the Senate when that bill goes over and those dukes and big mules over there take a crack at it?
Well, they know what they're facing. Senator Boren of Oklahoma, Democrat swing vote on the Finance Committee, has made it very clear that he would oppose what they call the BTU tax, the way they measure the energy tax, and he has some other votes with him. But they've already prepared for that, and there were indications in the House debate today that this energy tax will not be completely abandoned, but it will be adjusted and revised. And I think the same phenomenon in the end will take place in the Senate as did in the House. David Boren doesn't want to be responsible for crushing the new Democratic president, and they will work something out. It's a sticky wicket, but I think they will.
Is there any profit to be gained in predicting what the Senate's going to do, Kevin?
Well, the Senate is, because they represent states, more rural, more small town, more people who represent farmers, more energy industry. So they're going to water it down more. And it's going to be, I think, a victory for the president, sort of. I mean, he'll need to win it politically. But it's going to be a package out there which people will have seen and seen and seen go through Congress, even though the public doesn't really like it anymore.
I forgot to ask you this. The deal that was struck sometime after midnight between the conservative Democrats and the leadership was that each year the president would set an estimate of spending on the Medicare and Social Security, and then at the end of the year, if the expenditures exceeded that, then the president and the Congress would have to sit down and either cut, raise taxes, or borrow. So nobody bit the bullet today, then, did they?
Sounds like Graham Rudman 2.5 or something like that. Yeah.
So what? I mean, are they perpetrating another?
I don't think so.
Hoodwink on the people? No,
I don't think so. There's a bit of discipline in there. In other words, what really has been driving the deficit are these so-called entitlement programs,
right,
not really the other conventional spending programs, and they keep sort of spiraling. So they've said we're not going to be able to just ignore that. You're going to have to face it and cast a vote one way or the other, whether you're going to let that go on or you're going to tax for it or you're going to cut the spending. The thing that's going to change that a bit and adjust a bit is the health program. The health care program that's coming up is also designed to cut the spiraling spending in the health care programs, which is mainly what drives those deficits up.
And do you assume that health care program is going to roll right through?
No.
No, you don't.
No.
So we have a lot of conversation left on all. Thank you very much, Elizabeth Drew and Kevin Phillips.
Besides the struggle in Congress, this has been another rough week for President Clinton, and today he went on the offensive. In this morning's televised town meeting, he fielded a wide range of questions before an audience in the White House Rose Garden. Here are some extended excerpts.
What went wrong?
First of all, I don't know that anything went wrong, except I'm glad nobody found out about the manicure I got in California.
Let's check it out.
Let me say, I'll tell you what went wrong. What went wrong was I was not able to keep the public focus on the issues that we're working on after I gave the State of the Union address, even though that's what we kept doing. Now, I think we're doing pretty well, but I think we've done a lousy job of being able to cut through the fog that always surrounds this town and communicate that.
I think a lot of people were hoping with a Democratic president and a Democratic Congress that things would have gone more smoothly. Do you think issues like the haircut and the problems in the travel office have made it harder for you to get this economic plan through?
No. I think this economic plan is tough. I think it does, because if you publicize something like that and people don't know, for example, on the haircut that I asked and whether anybody would be held up for inconvenience, and I was told no. I asked twice and I was told no. Man, I'd never do that. Not in 100 years. Not ever. I mean, I wasn't raised that way. I've never lived that way. That's not the kind of person I am.
Travelgate. Who knew what when? And why was the FBI called in? And why did you hire your cousin? And why did you have a firm from Arkansas take over this business? And
first of all, let's get back to the beginning, okay? Let's talk about my cousin. She's about my fifth or sixth cousin who worked in the campaign and ran the travel operations. We had a very efficient travel operation. Every operation of the White House was reviewed because I said I was going to cut the White House staff by 25%. That's not easy to do. I'm running to run the White House on fewer people than your predecessor. We got more mail in 3.5 months than came to the White House in all of 1992. It's tough. We found out that there were 7 people working in the travel office, primarily to book travel for the press, and that the press was complaining that the cost was too high. So there were all these recommendations made to change it, but nothing was done until an accounting firm came in and reviewed the operation and found serious management questions in terms of unaccounted for funds and things like that. So then the person in charge of that made the decision to replace them. Now, all those questions were raised about whether they all should have been replaced. Mr. McClarty got on it. He did an internal review. He'll fix it.
nobody's going to argue with that, but what they are going to argue with is why was the FBI called in?
Oh, the FBI, because the FBI was called in to look at the auditor's report. Not to accuse any of these people of doing anything criminal, but because there were sufficient questions raised that there had to be a review of it. And that FBI sounds like a huge deal to you, but when you're in Washington, you're the president, you can't call the local police or the local prosecutor. That's who you call.
But even your own Attorney General is now posing the question about a breach of policy.
Well,
is she right or wrong?
There has never been a policy that if the White House had a local internal matter, they had to go through the Attorney General to get to the FBI. The FBI has always been an independent investigative agency. But I have no problem with doing that because I trust her. I think she's got great judgment.
Mr. President, when you wake up in the morning, before you get out of bed, do you lie there and think, what stupid little thing's going to happen today?
Some days I do. What I really think of is stupid little things happen to everybody, and I just hope that if some stupid little thing happens to me, it won't overshadow all the big good things I'm trying to do. But actually, when I get up in the morning, I say a little prayer that I won't make any stupid little mistakes and that I'll do right by America today. That's what I do. Then I go out here and run off old age, or I do my best to do that.
The president added he was not entirely satisfied with his White House staff, but praised them for working hard and said they were fixing a lot of what he called glitches. Next, the uproar over the personal papers of the late Thurgood Marshall, who died in January. The Supreme Court justice willed his private papers and files to the Library of Congress. Almost immediately after his death, the library made them available to researchers and journalists. This week, the Washington Post ran a series of reports based on the papers, providing a rare behind-the-scenes look at how the Supreme Court operates. Among other things, they disclosed that the historic Roe v. Wade decision was almost overturned in 1989. An 11th-hour shift in votes on the court prevented that. Yesterday, Chief Justice William Rehnquist sent a sharply worded protest letter to the library saying it had used bad judgment in releasing the papers so soon and asked that they be withdrawn from public access. But the Librarian of Congress, James Billington, refused, citing the agreement he made with Justice Marshall. We'll debate the issue, but first we hear from one of the journalists who's seen and written about them. Bob Woodward is Deputy Managing Editor for Investigative Reporting at the Washington Post. He's also the author of a book about the Supreme Court called The Brethren. Bob Woodward, what is it in these papers that has caused so much excitement?
Well, that it's kind of the raw truth. It lays out the detail, the inside nitty-gritty. For instance, in the abortion case that is cited there, the files on the case in the Marshall papers have some 25 memos, about 19 drafts of the opinion, and when you look at it and lay out a chronology, you see they really were on the brink almost of overturning the very famous 73 Roe v. Wade decision.
Can you give us any more detail about that, about the change of mind that caused that stopped the reversal?
Well, for almost 2 months, the papers show that Chief Justice Rehnquist was writing a majority opinion for the court that effectively would have said and changed the abortion decision. Sandra Day O'Connor was supposedly on board. About 5 days before the decision is to be announced, she circulates a typed memo saying, "I cannot go along with all of this," and in the end, she did not.
Mm-hmm. Has this kind of behind-the-scenes detail never appeared before?
In 1979, when Scott Armstrong and I did the book on the Burger Court, The Brethren, we had access to lots of internal papers. But in the case of Marshall, who served 24 years on the court, all of the case files are there, 3,000 of them. The nature of the court's business is such that every justice seems to get circulated every memo and opinion draft. So, as we called it when Ben Weiser, a reporter at the Post, first stumbled on this, is really a treasure trove and a gold mine of information about how constitutional law is made.
Describe another case that about which these papers is particularly revealing.
There was a death case in Texas where somebody was going to be executed, and the court was going to overturn the decision and then later changed their mind when they could not reach agreement on a written opinion. Lots of paper on this, lots of draft opinions, and in the end they upheld the conviction. In this case, the Texas governor, for totally unrelated reasons, commuted the sentence so the person was not executed.
As somebody who's reported on and studied the court, what did you learn about its procedures that you didn't know before?
Well, it runs the full range. You see that the justices are concerned, for instance, and they write memos to each other on this, about being used by the White House. In this case, President Bush having swearing-in ceremonies down at the White House, and they fear they're being politicized, and some of them boycotted that. You see in a whole range of cases, the Supreme Court is such that every important issue in our society tends to land in their lap. They are a very secretive institution. They publish their opinions. It's rare for a justice to speak out or for information to leak out. So all of a sudden we have the blueprint of the making of legal sausage, if you will.
I've forgotten who it was, Metternich or somebody else, who said that some things, the making of sausages in war, should not be shown to the public. Have we seen, in your view, things that we should not see?
No, not at all. This is even though it's the Supreme Court, it's really the people's court. They decide finally what the law is going to be, what rights we have. To put them off in a marble building and say they are excluded from the disinfectant of sunlight, analysis, debate, would be absurd in a democracy.
Do the papers that you saw suggest that the court is any more or any less sensitive to current political controversy than one supposes?
That's a good question. In looking at the cases, and we've only examined a small fraction of them, I don't see that really. You really see serious people debating these issues that are not just legal, but are moral and political. And there's a political element. You see them saying, look, if you'll insert this paragraph and drop those 4 words, I'll sign on to the opinion. It's the sort of thing a legislature does.
Well, Bob Woodward, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
What harm, if any, is done by making Thurgood Marshall's papers public so soon? We have 4 views. Chief Judge Abner Mikva is on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. Karen Hasty Williams is a lawyer and Justice Marshall's goddaughter. She was a law clerk for him in 1974 and 75. Floyd Abrams is a constitutional lawyer who's argued many cases before the Supreme Court. And David Wigdor is the Assistant Chief of the Manuscript Division of the Library of Congress and met with Thurgood Marshall over the acquisition of his papers. Mr. Wigdor, describe the understanding that you heard or took part in as it was being reached.
Justice Marshall met with James Billington, the Librarian of Congress, and a colleague of mine, Deborah Newman-Ham, our Afro-American history specialist, and I, just after the term of court began in October of '91. Justice Marshall very clearly stated to us that his papers were to be available without restriction after his death. His initial feeling about his papers was that they would be closed during his lifetime. But since he had mentioned some projects relating to the court in a favorable way, some books that were currently being written, I asked him if he wanted to consider making his papers available on a more selective basis with his specific permission during his lifetime, and he agreed to do that. He seemed very precise about his judgments for his papers. He communicated them to us in a brisk, crisp manner. He was authoritative, and he established procedures that had a great deal of precedent in the Manuscript Division for justices, judges, and other people in public and private life.
Did he place any restrictions on the access to his papers after his death?
Before his death, the access was to be with his permission. After his death, access was to be unrestricted, save for certain security classified materials that he thought might be in his files from his service as Solicitor General of the United States.
Now, Ms. Williams, you believe he did not, your godfather did not intend such free access. Is that right? And what are your grounds for believing that?
My view, and I believe that of Justice Marshall's family, his friends, his colleagues at the court, was that he did not intend for his papers to be made public until at least 10 years after his death. We believe that in the paper of deed that he transferred the papers to the court, there is a phrase that they would be made available at the discretion of the library. We believe he trusted in the precedent where other past justices had given their papers to the library and they had not been disclosed to the public. So we firmly believe this was an abuse of discretion of the library in terms of when these papers were disclosed, and in addition, an abuse of discretion with respect to the people to whom they were disclosed. The deed of gift says they will be used by researchers and serious scholars. We do not consider making them available to the general public, to journalists, consistent with what was stated in that document.
Mr. Wigdor, an abuse of discretion, particularly on the Ms. Williams' belief that this was violating the precedent that had been established in other justices' papers.
Well, the precedent, the principal precedent that the library follows is the wishes of the donor. Other donors have communicated different wishes to us. Justice Marshall's were as I've described them, and we followed them scrupulously. There was never any indication that he favored limiting access to other than the normal users of the manuscript division. As a matter of fact, when we talked about projects underway relating to the court, he mentioned with some enthusiasm a study that was underway by a journalist. So there's nothing in the conversation we had with Justice Marshall to indicate that he had some different conception of availability of his papers.
Ms. Williams, I asked you before, how do you know he intended that? And I ask it again because clearly he didn't communicate it to Mr. Wigdor and Mr. Billington.
Based on my conversations with Justice Marshall, based on conversations he had had with his prior law clerks, it was clear that one of the things he respected most was the institution of the court. He firmly believed that it was very important that the internal deliberations of the court be held with the ability for candor among the justices. He wouldn't have interviews with the press during the time he served on the court. He declined to do a biography because he did not want the internal deliberations made public. He very much believed in the court. He believed in its role as an interpreter of the Constitution. Even justices with whom he disagreed, he respected their right to have internal discussions, free and open discussions. So we believe that this action by the Librarian of Congress is totally inconsistent with his past history, with what he communicated to us. And we believe that the librarian stating that he knows the intent of the justice when his family, his friends, his colleagues in the court do not know his intent, I believe is very demeaning to the justice and to the institution of the court.
Well, wouldn't you have expected him to express his intent clearly as a lawyer himself and a great jurist, that he would have, if he wanted the access delayed for 10 years or limited to certain people, that he would have said so?
I believe that he relied on the integrity of the institution, of the past precedent that he was aware of with Justice Douglas and other justices whose papers were not made public, and so he felt it wasn't necessary to put an express limitation in the document.
Mr. Wigdon, do those other justices make express limitations on access?
Yes, they did, and if limitations are made, then we will certainly follow them. But what Justice Marshall did was to propose a scheme of administration that was perfectly consistent with that chosen by other justices. Justice Burton, whose papers are among the most important for the study of the modern court, chose precisely the same procedures that Justice Marshall did. Access was available during his lifetime with his permission. At his death, the collection was entirely unrestricted.
Were you so surprised by his failing to do what other justices had done that after he left, you said to yourselves, gee, he didn't place any restrictions. We can release these right after he's died.
It seemed like a.
Did you comment on the precedent, in other words?
Well, it was a very. I hate to say that anything was conventional about the meeting with Justice Marshall, because it was a very exciting thing for all of us. But this was a very conventional arrangement that he had selected, one that was characteristic not only of Justice Burton's papers, but also of Justice Brennan's, Justice Brennan's were available during his lifetime with his permission, and at his death they're available without restriction. So it seemed to me that it was perfectly consistent with earlier practice. It also is consistent with the practice of other judges. For example, one of your distinguished predecessors, Judge Mikva, Judge Scully Wright.
Let's ask Judge Mikva not only about the precedent, but what harm has it done to open the Marshall papers so soon?
Well, it harmed two institutions. First of all, let me say that the material that was released was not embarrassing to the individuals. I think it showed the court in a favorable light, the justices in a favorable light. It showed that they care deeply about their job and that they are concerned about it, that they had passionate views about their positions. But it harmed the institutions. The first institution I regret to say it harmed is the court itself. Those processes by which the judges reach decisions in a collegial court are not political processes. They deal with political questions very often, such as Roe versus Wade and Brown versus Board. But the process by which they reach a decision must be apolitical and must be perceived to be apolitical. Now, they're done by mortals. These are not the oracles of Delphi who make these decisions. And so the result is that there are things that look like political processes. You can look at the memos back and forth in the Webster case, and it looks like the horse trading that I used to do when I was in Congress. But that's bad for the institution if the process is perceived as political. And I have to say one other thing, Mr. Wigdo. I regret that I think that the Library of Congress, one of my very favorite institutions, was harmed by this. I think a lot of members of the Congress and a lot of judges are going to look again at their deeds of gift and are going to look about whether or not they want to use the library as their depository. I don't use them, and I'm glad I don't.
Mr. Abrams, Floyd Abrams in Miami, you have a different view of this. You think there's been some positive benefit in releasing these papers. Is that correct?
Yes. I think, for one thing, that it should be said that there is always a positive benefit in having the public, sometime after the event at least, get a closer sense, a better sense, a more accurate sense of how an institution of government works, and how, in this case, the Supreme Court of the United States. I don't disagree with Judge Mikva that at some time and place, it's important that things be kept secret and private, and that members of the court be able to really freely express themselves. I'm just not persuaded, though, that members of the court won't express themselves freely in the future as a result of this. I don't think the court has been hurt as an institution, and I do think the public has been the beneficiary of getting a greater sense, and indeed a more admirable sense, of this precious institution of the Supreme Court. And as for the Library of Congress, I think they have been most unjustly treated by a number of people who really should know better.
Judge Mikva, comment on that.
If I sent you a memo and asked you to treat it as confidential, and you released it, I assure you I would not send you another confidential memo. The problem is that most of the papers that were released here were not just as Marshall's notes or papers. They were confidential memos sent to him as a member of the court by other members of the court. Now, he's no longer in the loop, but I think that the judges and justices will think twice about how candid they're going to be in those memos that they send to other judges and other justices while they're working their way through to a decision. And Floyd, that hurts the process, and it hurts it whether it's contemporaneous to the event or whether it's shortly after the event as these papers.
Floyd Abrams, you don't think it will have such an inhibiting effect?
Look, Judge Mikva is a judge, and he would know better than I the impact on the judiciary. It shouldn't have an inhibitory effect. Members of the court have to communicate with each other. They have to speak to each other. They have to try to persuade each other. I understand that the sense that they're bruised and angry about this, but I also think that that's the sort of feeling that comes and goes. It passes. Lots of other institutions of government have survived a lot worse than this, and my own judgment is that members of all our courts will speak to each other just as they did before. I hope they don't make the decision not to make their papers available after their death, but Justice Marshall is really the one who ultimately had the final choice. And if his wishes are being adhered to, if this is what he wanted to have happen, I don't think the public is the loser, and I don't think that the courts are the loser.
But that's the issue. Is that what he wanted? And we take the view that that is not what he wanted.
Mr. Abrams?
Well, I don't have any personal knowledge on that. I'm told that the Library of Congress has internal notes which reflect the very conversation that they had with Justice Marshall. That argument is really between you and the Library of Congress. But my view is that as an institutional matter, so long as the Library of Congress accurately and fairly carried out what Justice Marshall told them to do, that no one has done anything wrong, and this orgy of recrimination is most unfair.
Let me add one other dimension in this question of who's harmed. There are many judges, Mr. Abrams, and justices. I don't know how many justices, but I know there are many judges and at least one justice who still adhere to the notion that these papers are private to them and they can burn them and they're death. I think one of the great losses to history was that Justice Black, one of the great justices of our court, believed that that was an appropriate policy for him to follow. We don't have any papers of Justice Black, not only for contemporaneous disclosure, but for disclosure even now, so many years after his death. I have judges on my court that I've been discussing this matter with for many years now, trying to persuade them that their papers do have a historical significance and they ought to hang on to them. I think that this disclosure is going to make it very hard for me to win that fight, and I think it's going to encourage a lot of judges to say, see, the only way to be safe is light a match to him on my death.
Justice Marshall intended to burn his papers. He said that any number of times.
Well,
and he was convinced by the Library of Congress to give the papers to the library, trusting that they would retain the confidentiality of the papers. And this obviously has not been done by the library.
Well, we can only follow the procedures that the donor establishes for us. We cannot follow procedures of an institution that don't really exist.
Mr. Wigdor, did you and Mr. Billington have to persuade the justice to give his papers? Was he inclined, as we've just heard Ms. Williams suggest, not to give them, to burn them, to destroy them, to withhold them?
We had heard from time to time that Justice Marshall had intended to destroy his papers, but his expressions to us were very clear. These weren't procedures that we proposed to him. He insisted that he wanted the material available at his death and available without restriction.
Judge Mikva, let's go in the remaining time over back to the question of the mystique of the Supreme Court. Isn't it in the nature of this democracy, in fact, the very soul of this democracy, to pull all the curtains aside on everything, really, and to see that it isn't a Wizard of Oz behind the curtain. It is human beings with all their frailties who nevertheless are behaving collectively, seriously, and with dignity and addressing these problems?
Well, there are some who take that view, and indeed there is frequently efforts made to democratize the courts, to elect them, as many of our states do, to take off the black robe and the high bench. But I really think that part of the reason that the federal judicial system has worked as effectively as it has for 200 years as the third branch of government is that there is some mystique about it. It isn't, the life of the law is not always logic. Sometimes it is mystical. The capacity of the court to have its decrees observed because people think the court is acting in a non-political, non-partisan, discreet way. And when you remove all the curtains, when you give that disinfectant that Bob Woodward talked about, you are showing their mortal side. It's true, they are mortals. We've never yet appointed a saint to the Supreme Court, or even anybody who came directly from Mount Sinai. But showing off their mortality doesn't do anything for the process. As I say, the justices weren't personally embarrassed by this, but the process was embarrassed. And I think that indeed people looking at Supreme Court decisions after this, after they read the Brethren, are going to say, hey, they're just another bunch of politicians like those fellows up the hill, and their decisions are just as subject to disagreement and argument as the others.
Mr. Abrams, what's your comment on that?
It seems to me that mystique has a role in our life, but we really have to be careful not to overdo it. Truth-telling has a role, too. Public information has a role, too. Public knowledge of what really happens has a place, too. And it seems to me that if you push the mystique theory too far, that what you're really saying is that you just can't trust the public to believe in the courts as an institution of government and as an independent, autonomous entity if they learn too much. I think if we've learned anything from these papers, it's how well the courts work. It's how marvelous an institution the Supreme Court is. And I don't think that there's any reason to think that the public will lose respect for the courts, and I think that the courts ought to have a little more respect for the public.
Floyd, would you like the justices on a hot case like Brown versus Board or Webster to debate their positions in public, go on the MacNeil Lehrer show and talk about their opinions?
No, but I think, because during the process of deciding, I think that should be intrajudicial for all the reasons that you said. Because
that's right.
Because they would be inhibited. But
the court acts through those written opinions that they have issued. And when you start digging behind them, it's digging at that mystique, but it also is digging away at the legitimacy of those opinions as the expression of the highest court.
Is it digging away at all, Judge Mikva, or is it a question of only when you dig? How long after you dig?
It's only a question of when, because we could, if someone were to find some new papers of Oliver Wendell Holmes at this point, no matter how personal they were, and no matter how different a picture they might paint of his persona, they wouldn't be embarrassing, and they indeed might shed some light on this great justice. But when they are contemporaneous, when they impact the process that's going on, then it's dangerous. That very case, the Webster case, will be up before the court again. And some of the players whose private views were disclosed here will have to act again. And I think in that way the process has been debilitated.
Mr. Abrams, briefly.
Well, I hear you, Judge Mikva. I hear you, and yet my reaction is the courts can overcome any such feeling of inhibition on their parts, and that the public has profited, and by being able to test with the raw data the ultimate legitimacy of our system, by being able to focus not just on this final product, but on process itself. And I think that it is good in the end of the day for the public to have the information.
Sorry to interrupt. Floyd Abrams, Judge Mikva, Ms. Williams, and David Wigler, thank you for joining us.
Again, the major stories of this Thursday: the House of Representatives is voting tonight on President Clinton's economic plan. Democrats predicted they had enough votes to win without any help from the Republicans, who are united against it. And President Clinton assessed his first 4 months in office, saying he had done pretty well overall, but had done a lousy job of communicating his priorities to the public. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Roger. That's the News Hour for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night with our regular Friday political analysts, Gergen and Shields. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the MacNeil